My name's Kevin
Oh, hang
Leach.
on. Oh, no,
Oh,
just yet.
oh,
Hello. Just wasn't ready. Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. I'm joined today with, as you just heard, actually, Kevin Leach, whom I met in Ukraine, actually, a couple of times. Once we went to, I think, a Lviv croissants, sat down with an
mhm.
Azov commander and Jonathan Fink and myself, and we had a chat and actually Kevin speaks Ukrainian, was doing some translating, as well as we had Maxime, one of our fixer guys that was there helping us out. So really interesting. That was an interesting conversation. That's where I met Kevin, and then met him again, I think, at a chat that he came to, a talk that Jonathan gave in Kiev to a philosopher, which was absolutely fantastic. Really interesting
Mhm.
that was. And anyway, I stayed in touch with Kevin and said, look, do you fancy coming on and explaining who you are, what you do, and what your connection to the war in Ukraine is? And he's back in Canada at the moment, but I'll let him introduce himself, what his background is, and what his connection to the war in Ukraine is, and how he's been helping. So, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. So, yeah, my background is it's it's not bad. It's a bit. I'll try and cut it down. Um, yeah, so I spent 10 years here in Canada in the Army, and back in 2018, I sort of had an itch to do something different, and I took a contract working with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and they had the special monitoring mission in Ukraine that was overseeing the ceasefires agreed under the Minsk 1 and 2 agreements. Um, so that's what initially brought me out to Ukraine. That was almost 7 years ago. And I worked with the OSCE in that role um, in Kiev at the head office until the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Then obviously everything shut down on that mission. I think it's fair to say that the ceasefires failed. Um, once the invasion had begun, I started by bringing medical supplies into the country, and quickly realized that in the course of delivering these supplies, that training was very badly needed for Ukrainian forces, just because of the number of people that were joining and how those forces were increasing. So uh, drawing on my military experience, because of the 10 years that I was in the Canadian Army, I spent 6 as an instructor. So drawing on that experience, I started to teach Ukrainian soldiers, starting out very basic stuff. So we could think like TCCC at the ASM level. I wasn't teaching that. I have instructors for that. But then kind of basic soldier skills, which you would think of as basic infantry skills, things like how to shoot, how to communicate in a squad, how to communicate between squads, and getting into things like mission planning. So starting out, it was myself and a couple of instructors, or an interpreter and an instructor, and we were driving around in a pretty busted up old Jeep that I bought before the invasion, and it's now grown so that we've in the past 2.5 years, just about, we have trained just a little bit over 4,000 troops. Not all to
Wow.
the same level. Yeah, well, it's pretty good. It depends how much time we have with them. So the longest and kind of the average time that we have now is 2 months. In the summer of 2023, actually, it's the background photo that you're just scrolling through there. We had 2 months with some troops from the National Guard of Ukraine, and we were able to work with them and really make sure that they had all of the basic skills that we needed them to. And then we moved into teaching them how to operate as a team. And the training gets more and more complex as you go. By the end of those 2 months, we had them doing platoon level, like simulated missions. Of course, platoon thinking, it's about 40 people. There were 100 students in total, just about, so a company size. And yeah, by the end, we were really just kind of overseeing them as they did these simulated missions that we gave them. watching them do the planning process and all the way through the execution. And it was great. We got them to what I would say is an acceptable standard in the NATO framework. And why this is one of our most significant um, trainings to date, because we were able to track them from the time that we started teaching them obviously through the time we were training them, but also into and through their first combat rotation. And what we saw there was that the training within, like, using the methodologies that we learned uh, with our experience in NATO militaries, they took about 60% fewer casualties than the companies either side them that hadn't worked with us.
Wow, I
And
was just going to ask how you
yeah,
measure, because surely you need a control, but yeah, so you've sort of got that.
the control, I guess, would be the comparison of the others that didn't work with us.
Mhm.
And of course, it's a small sample size,
Yeah.
but I'm not a scientist. I'm a soldier, so it's good enough for me to know that these interventions, while being quite small in terms of the overall cost and certainly the time cost, just by having well organized and gradual and standardized training, you can achieve incredible outcomes for the soldiers. And so it was really that the early, I'd say the first quarter of 2024, when they finished that first combat rotation, and we started hearing back from them, and I was able to talk to their NCOs and officers and say, what worked in the training, what didn't work, what was missing. Um, that really helped us, I would say, lock in and uh, finish out the final pieces of what we needed to know in order to train the best that we could in the Ukrainian context, because there's a lot of difference there.
So how did you get to initially do that? I mean, who do you go up to, and who agrees to send a bunch of very much needed troops to you, some like effectively random Canadian guy, right?
Yeah.
From the larger like frame of thinking, like how does that happen? And then how much were you appreciated or not? I don't know, by the people that actually organize this.
So the story of this is really, it's the story of working in Ukraine. And it's a
Right.
shock for a lot of Westerners that arrive, because a lot of Westerners think, like, I'm going to go to the appropriate government office and fill out the appropriate government forms and be able to do, whatever. And Ukraine, like, obviously there is a bureaucracy and there are rules and laws, but Ukraine's not the kind of place where you go and fill out some application. You have to do everything through personal relationships and meeting people. So that company we met initially while we were working with another smaller group it was actually a bit of abandoned land that just happened to be perfect for our purposes. It had one very large building that we could kind of train sort of CQB in. It had it had been a health resort, and so, pardon me, it had a cluster of small buildings that worked to simulate a village environment, and then it was surrounded by forest with forest tracks and clearings. So everything that we needed to train, we could train there, and we were using that because at the time we didn't have permission to go on any kind of base. That's what we were using for training. So we met a group of soldiers from the same brigade as that company that we trained, and their commander, who was a major, he asked to speak to me because he saw what we were doing, and he said, "Would you be able to work with us?" So that was the beginning of that relationship. It was really just coincidence that we met at the same training area, and funny enough, down the line, we ended up working. So through most of 2024, we ended up working with Rubige Brigade, or Fourth Rapid Reaction Brigade, as people may remember. They were critical at the defense of Hostomel Airport. Through most of 2024, we were working with them on the base that they occupy near Kiev, and we ran into this other brigade that we had initially worked with back in 2023, because they were now working on that training on that same base. Um, so it's just a neat little reunion. But no, it's to put it very short, the key the key to working well in Ukraine is building and really fostering and growing relationships with people that who are competent and dedicated. Because once it's a bit of a dance. You take time to get to know one another, and you have to show them your work ethic, show them your dedication, and likewise look for that from them, because there's your mileage may vary. Sometimes you could run into some very, say, lazy people. But no, you build those relationships up, and then as you each advance, you help out. You help you help the people that you have those relationships out with, and make each other stronger, and build each other up. So it was through. Oh, sorry.
Well, no, no, carry on, because I'll
Okay.
just go to the.
So no, it's through those relationships that we've gotten to our the highest level that we work on now. So we work directly with the National Guard's Northern Territorial Administration. So they're responsible for Zhytomyr, Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Cherkasy oblasts, and that lets us travel a little bit more. We're primarily working in Cherkasy now, but the whole goal of that is for us to kind of advance as high as we can within the NGU as an organization, in order to get at that level where we're having. My goal is for us as an organization to have a state level actor effect. So we want to be, when we're in our best position, I want the effect of our work to be measured in thousands of troops trained yearly. So it's
So it's
a
interesting. So you're
tall order.
a private entity, if you like, offering a service to Ukraine, where we're also hearing about Operation Interflex, say in the UK, where Ukrainian soldiers are sent to the UK, and you've got loads of different nations training them. Then you've got what's going on in Poland, what's going on in Germany, and probably other nations as well. So that's how do other nations see you, or are you not on their radar? And how do you get your funding?
Okay, so we operate as a not-for-profit. We're registered in both Canada and Ukraine. We we uh, we work entirely through donations. We are um, on the radar, so to speak, of at least the Canadian and British governments, because we have so our executive team is Canadian and British, and we're able to build some small ties in there. Right now, the way that we approach things is as a social enterprise, and so we don't fit into the PMC mold. We don't deliver training in the format that, for example, Academy or oh goodness, what are the Ronin or any of the other sort of training companies, because they have they take a course. It's a week, it's 2 weeks, it's a month, or whatever, and it's designed to give you this certification. We work in a more common, not more common, a more typical military style. So we deliver training the way that a Western battle school does. So the idea is that we're taking someone from zero to a competent infantryman who understands how to operate at the squad level and has a familiarity with his role in a platoon level operation. Um, so it's very much like we cover everything from the absolute basic training that you would have in a NATO military to the first level of your trade training,
So
if
you take
in the infantry
recruits.
context.
You just take recruits, then, basically.
We no, so we train who we're given. So we've worked with experienced soldiers to kind of, as much as we could, pick up their level uh, of mostly organizational stuff. So like mission planning with the experienced ones, because I mean they already have the skills. And then but we do also work with recruits, and in that case, we're delivering basic training. It can be on a little bit of a rotation. It just depends what our uh, bosses, so to speak, need from us. But the long-term goal for us is that we want to help build the new Ukrainian standard, so to speak. So to write the doctrine and SOPs that go into the new basic training for Ukrainian troops, so that they are not having to deal with anything that even a little bit Soviet related, because that
Yeah.
is unfortunately still a problem.
Well, actually, that brings me on to my next question, which is going to be: we've heard a lot over the course of the year, and actually, the course of the war. This was talked about right at the beginning. That there's this whole Soviet mindset that still exists in the Ukrainian armed forces, but also that NATO training that tries to give, as far as I understand it, more power, if you like, to the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers. So there's this decision-making ability much further down the chain of command that gives a better reactiveness, I guess,
Mhm.
for whatever units you're talking about. But at the same time, while NATO training is what you want to get Ukraine on board with, so that there's interoperability, so that if they do eventually get into NATO, or they're working closely with European forces or whatever, there is that interoperability. But there
Mhm.
was then this conversation, many claims that actually the NATO training just wasn't good enough. Partly, I guess, because there were many different levels of Ukrainian soldiers that were maybe getting training, but also because the battlefield that the Ukrainians were involved in wasn't the battlefield that NATO's been used to themselves, and actually things have evolved. And so, what are your thoughts on how adequate NATO training has been from what you understand, as in all those training that I was talking about earlier?
Mhm.
What you have learned from that for your training, and how you've adapted your training to be as good as it possibly can be for the needs of that particular battle space.
So, I don't want to say anything impolitic, and I don't want to really uh, pile on the NATO training, but the issue is with NATO militaries, there's a massive bureaucracy. There is an established and ironclad doctrine, which in
Hmm.
order to change that requires it's a whole long process, and you got to get a bunch of generals in a room, and they have to give each other permission to think. Um, the point is it's very inflexible, and
Mm.
one of the issues that we've run into is and I've heard this from the Ukrainian side, I've heard this spoken a little more quietly from the NATO side, is that the the training is often not very well received because there are um, sort of pieces missing. One notable thing is that most NATO military bases will not let anyone fly small drones over them. And if you, for example, if you're not integrating drones into infantry training from the start, you're just undercutting these guys because they need to have an understanding of these things. I was speaking
Mm.
with a colonel from the MGU headquarters, and it's his personal belief, and I share it, is that every infantry soldier should have a basic understanding of how to fly just like the normal off the shelf DJI drone, because you need that to you need to understand that. And if it's an asset that can be down at the squad level, and carry out a lot of really good reconnaissance. um, but it also, by understanding how drones are used, you have an understanding of how to avoid them, how to fight against them as an infantier, which is important because despite what a lot of people say online, drones are not going to replace the infantry. Nothing is ever going to replace the infantry. The infantry is the core of every single military. Everything else exists to enable the infantry to do their job, which is to take and hold territory, um, and to close with and destroy the enemy. But the point is that inflexibility in the NATO training has caused a lot of doubt on the Ukrainian side. They are beginning to say, like, what do these guys even really know? And I think it's because there's a failure to listen to Ukrainians, and there's a failure
Mm.
to take lessons learned, for example, from organizations like ours. I I get mixed results when I deal with Western officers, because I can get some enthusiastic receptions, but I can also get some almost it seems like I'm being patted on the head and said, "Oh, it's nice, Sergeant, that you think you have ideas." I retired as a sergeant, and so it's an interesting mix, because the people that get it really get it, and the people that condescend, I think, are just I don't know where their head is, because we're watching how 21st century warfare works. And if our militaries aren't taking notes, that's going to cost, quite frankly, that's going to cost the lives of guys that are like me. And so I do take it a little bit personally when they're uh, so flippant about this.
But
Um,
has your training organization taken on board, like you talk about, that NATO haven't? Have you taken on board drone training? Like, do you have
yeah,
drone operators and whatnot working? And is
we
that
we
obviously that's probably something you didn't start with, but have ended up having to
no,
integrate?
we work alongside drone operators. We Because we concentrate on infantry skills, we don't do a lot of that. Like we also don't have the resources to take people out
Mm,
and have them flying FPVs or something. But when for example, if we're doing patrolling, we will take we have a little DJI Mini, and we'll fly that over the troops, and we'll try and as best we can simulate. You know, this is what you're going to hear, boys. Like, listen for this,
yeah.
and then and show them what a drone feed looks like, so that they understand um, better how to camouflage themselves, what to look for when they're flying around themselves. But in terms of lessons learned, we stay as fresh as possible. We frequently go out to the east of Ukraine, and because we have lots of connections out there as well, and just talk with people and get them, what are the newest tactics that are being used. A
Mm,
big example of that was how we initially started to teach trench assaults, because we stayed away from it for a while because we're looking at our old doctrine, drawing from NATO sources, Canadian and British, and we're like, I don't know if this is going to work. This seems to be kind of theoretical, trench tactics that were cooked up in the 80s by someone in an office. Because going, I guess assaulting a trench will look like this. Now we have people who've done it, and
mm,
they explain to us their tactics. And so it was while we were working with the 68th Jaeger Brigade in the east of Ukraine, we watched them do their their trench assault training, and we drew from that. And then later on, working with Rubige, one of their deputy battalion commanders, we were able to watch him carrying out or overseeing some more trench training, and that kind of like helped solidify the way that we approach it. So because our organization is very agile. We are not the government. I don't need anyone's permission to change our curriculum.
mm.
Between myself and my training director, we talk to people, we get the lessons learned, we integrate it instantly, and that's it's part of our value proposition. So I think some people within your audience will be familiar with Frankie, Jahara Frankie Matisek, Will Reno, and Alexandra Chinchilla. There are three academics that are studying security force assistance, and some of what they have commented on, what I have listened to them commenting on conclusions of their academic work is stuff that we figured out just kind of as practitioners.
On the fly, yeah.
Barrier, yeah, yeah, and things that are barriers to success of security force assistance missions. And one of those things is building long-term relationships, building trust, and keeping momentum going in a given country. Because you can have this has been a problem, and it's been something that's been I've been told about this from the Ukrainian side and from the Canadian side in the old Operation Unifier, where the issue was that you would have a 3 to 6 month rotation, usually 6 months, but a 6 month rotation of instructors. The first 2 months they're just kind of getting to know the lay of the land. The middle 2 months they're really getting to work, and the last 2 months they're preparing to rotate out. And every time they do, it's the entire contingent rotating out at once. And so an entirely new set of people come in, and
Right.
they start to reinvent the wheel. Um, so you had that lack of continuity, you had that lack of relationship building, and so it hurts the impact of the mission overall. And this is part of something I'm trying to express to decision makers here in Canada and hopefully in Britain soon, is that we provide this foot on the ground. We provide this constant momentum, constant relationship building, and because we're coming out of the uh, primarily Canadian and British military systems, so we speak the same language, and we can help to interpret these lessons or generate and interpret these lessons learned. And I think it's in that way we represent a kind of critical missing piece. But I just have to, I have to spend more time and probably do a better job selling this to our governments and help them understand the need in that regard. So it's a bit of a
It's
long answer, but I hope comprehensive.
Well, it's an interesting time that we live in, because when you're talking about, yeah, for example, how to storm trenches as effectively as possible, like I think I could probably even cast a few opinions on that, and I'm just some random bloke sitting in his office in the south of the UK, because everything is recorded. There's drone that I can't tell you the amount of drone footage I've seen of, from a first person view point of view, like a body cam of
Mhm.
storming trenches, to like above, like a Mavic looking at an entire storming of trenches. Like, we're just getting visuals of a war just unfolding in every single sort of dimension and angle you can imagine. And so this is like a rich territory, I guess, for trainers going forward, to be able to take the footage from this war and say, right guys, this is what is going on in Ukraine right now, this happened last week, and let's see what we can learn from that, and let's see how we can become better soldiers ourselves.
And that's it. But the militaries are very hierarchical organizations, and they are a soldier's only allowed to do what his bosses let him do. I was speaking last night with a junior officer who's currently in the Canadian Army, and he pays very close attention to this war for various reasons. And he was trying to integrate into the training for his soldiers drones, and it's just months and months and months of headaches trying to get permission to fly a small drone on a training area for it to be ultimately denied. And that's just a small example. It's it frustrates me because there are places within Western militaries where people are paying attention to this stuff, and they are watching, and they are making adjustments, and they're thinking. And there's others, and it is the nature of large organizations. It's very hard to turn a big ship,
Mm,
and especially when you have bureaucracy, and especially when you have an inherently I don't mean this politically, I mean this from a values perspective, but inherently conservative organization that wants to
mm.
just not rock the boat. Let's stay on this course. Let's keep doing what we've been doing because it's worked in the past. We had
It's interesting you say that, small c conservatism. Like, if you talk about moral psychology and political
Mhm,
psychology, actually small c conservatism is something you'd expect in the armed forces, which is about tradition. So if you think about the psychologist Jonathan Haidt, he's done a lot of work into this, like what drives small c conservatives and liberals. And actually one of the
mhm.
things, or some of the things that conservatives value more than, say, liberals, are things like tradition, purity, in group, and all the things that actually you kind of instill in a unit, in an army, which is you're in group, you're fighting for your unit. But also there's a traditions, like the pomp and circumstance of the British Armed Forces, for example, as I'm sure there is in many, and fighting for Queen and country, or king and country these days, etc., etc. And so actually you will, because you're not going to get a liberal, usually you won't get very many like liberals, like herding cats. They don't like authority, right? Going and joining the armed forces, like fighting for king and country, being told, like generally speaking, there are not many comparatively lefty liberals in the armed forces, uh, compared to those of a more conservative bent. So what I'm thinking is that you are going to get naturally a more conservative mindset, like small c conservative mindset, when you have an armed forces, and when you have a large armed forces, then is, like you're saying, trying to turn the tanker. Whereas actually, when you're facing like an evolving battlefield, which is evolving quite quickly, you need agility and dynamism, which is kind of what you are now bringing to, certainly to your training, I guess, and that needs to be the case for larger military organizations. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
yeah. I mean, I really want to step away from the political angle on it because it's not
yeah,
a like
I'm talking more in I'm trying to talk more in
yeah,
psychological terms.
but it is it's not like because I'll put it to you this way: the that psychological framework and then the political framework don't at all align in the
Mm,
Canadian military. The it's just an issue of, I think often you have as a government organization, it ends up quite bureaucratic, and you have people that are bureaucrats more than leaders, especially in a peacetime military, because they just settle in like Like I just like to have everything just so. I don't want to rock the boat, and I don't want anything to
Rules and
change.
norms for
That's
the sake of rules and norms.
exactly. Just because it's we complained about it, myself and another senior NCO that I was in with at the same time, is this Sally, same as last year, same as last year, same as last year. We just I know that this doesn't get me yelled at when I report this on my training, so we're just going to do that. I'm not going to innovate. I'm not going to try
Right.
anything new. We're just going to do
Yeah.
what doesn't get me yelled at. And it's very, very frustrating because that. But I think it's unavoidable because there's that saying, you're always fighting the last war, and it's been the case in World War One, World War Two, Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War. We go in without failing to have innovated,
Right. Of
and
course.
it
Yeah.
it is it's a price paid in blood, and my this is why I would really like for our governments to sit up and pay attention so that less of a price is paid when the next time we enter a war, because
Yeah. Very good point.
it's learn now. But there's there's a lot to get in on that. That's actually worth its own conversation, kind of the institutional momentum outside of Ukraine. And look, I've been out of the Canadian Army for almost, gosh, we're going on 7 years. So I shouldn't I can't comment on the most recent situation, but this is just what I've noticed. Yeah, it's vis-a-vis large organizations, and it is where we fit in, and I need to find a way that I can persuasively explain that to decision makers in the West, because we need their support to
Yeah,
come
because
back on the. Sorry.
so it's quite interesting because actually, when you talk about the Ukrainian army and they're trying to change it now to put it into more formalized core
Mhm.
sort of setup, but they're basing those different core around the units that have succeeded in um, doing things correctly, right? Whether that,
Yes.
and you can include in terms of PR with some of these, as well as like what
Mhm.
they do militarily, how they organize themselves. And so, on the one hand, you've got this whole kind of Soviet era mindset across the Ukrainian armed forces. And on the other hand, you've got some of these units that are going and doing kind of their own thing, right? And
Mhm.
for, Third Assault Brigade and all these different units and then the army's gone, hang on, these guys are really good because they're doing their own thing, and so then they're going to use them as best practice to be the central components of these different core that other units can then learn from. And so you've almost got this contradiction, but it does seem that there is a recognition of
Yes.
like best practice going forward, so that's good.
Yes. It's so the this is why I really like working with Ukrainians, because they're very good at decentralized thinking. And now it takes a while to line things up and get a critical mass of people all moving in the same direction, but eventually it happens. That was shown in Maidan, and that was shown in the initial defense of Ukraine when the war began in 2014, and it was shown in the defense of Kyiv. It's constantly coming back up. You see that the way that Ukrainians approach things, as I said, it's very different working in Ukraine, because Ukrainians take a different approach to everything. They are much more. The word I would use is democratic, and not in that like every soldier sitting there they're having little votes and stuff. I mean that they're more flexible. They are drawing from the bottom up rather than having edicts come from the top down, and so it's very, very exciting. And this is stuff where we're trying to find ways that we can kind of pour gas on the fire in terms of training innovation for the Ukrainians, and and to help build those new standards, because it's one thing, like one strength that is undeniable is NATO training methodology is second to none. We find a way to take people from all walks of life and get them, not it's not, there's a stereotype of a soldier being just this box-headed person that only follows procedures and rules and doesn't think outside. A soldier that doesn't think is, I don't want them. They're a liability. I don't want them near me because they're going to get me killed.
Mm.
um, we are good at taking people, giving them skills and tools, and then kind of going, you now need to figure out how to use these to achieve this desired effect. And it's that thing, like, that's most shown in what we call mission command. So you have really, it's the way most Russian units operate. Most Western units operated this at the outset of the First World War. The Germans were the first to kind of innovate on. Oh, sorry, let me reel that back. Mission command is opposed by something called detail command. Detail command is how most Russian units operate now. It's how most Western units, most Western militaries operated at the outset of the First World War. The Prussians and then later the Germans innovated mission command. And the difference is detail command is at this time you will go here, at this time you will do this, and very it is detailed, and it is inflexible. And then when you have one thing go awry, oh well, the entire plan's pooched now because there's no flexibility. Mission command, it is, it starts with, this is my desired end state. I would like this piece of land to be taken for us. This is how, I give you a scheme of maneuver. This is how I think roughly it will be done. But there is flexibility in there so that the soldiers on the ground can make decisions as situation changes. And so the mission command style is probably the biggest gift that we could give to Ukrainian troops. And we've, a big part of the success that we've had in training has been delivering training in how to plan missions. One of our kind of, I think of him as our best student from the back in that summer of 23. He and I talked, and he said, I held to what you guys taught me. This is, I always went through planning. I shared this stuff with my guys, and as a result, he was a platoon commander, and his platoon, the people that we taught, they're mostly all still alive and unhurt. And we've seen it, so third assault you mentioned earlier. I once had a Ukrainian soldier telling me what made Third Assault Brigade so successful in their missions. And he describes to me the mission planning process, including rehearsals of a mission. He's like, they're going to attack an objective. Well, they go find a piece of land that's, where they control, that's safe. And they practice, pulling off this assault. And I'm like, yes, that's called a rehearsal, and it's part of the mission planning process. This stuff works. And we can talk about doctrine being outdated in the West, but what the West nails, NATO militaries really succeed at, and it's the best thing we can teach, is mission planning and coordination. So there's
it's funny. It sounds like in evolutionary, in the science of evolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
As in biological evolution, you get this thing called convergent evolution, which is where you can get this physical trait or physical appendage or whatever that evolves in this species, but evolves over there, maybe on the other side of the world in another species. And evolution has found this pathway 2 times to bring about the same outcome. And it's a bit like that. It's like the Third Assault Brigade have just, through trial and error or whatever, found the same kind of outcomes that you guys have through the trial and error of NATO training and warfare.
Exactly. Sometimes there's just one right way to do things. I use this example because sometimes we get a little pushback from students, like, Iraq and Afghanistan, this is a different kind of war. And my thing is like, look, shooting a rifle is always shooting a rifle. It doesn't matter where. You could be on bloody Mars. I mean, it'll be a little bit different in different atmospheres and different gravity, but at the same time, like the way that you hold the rifle, the way that you breathe and you shoot at the top of your breath, at the bottom of your breath, the way that you squeeze the trigger and you don't jerk it. That's always the same with every rifle on every country on this planet. And so it is definitely, it's a case of that convergent evolution. There's just there's things that work best. Four limbs on Earth's gravity work the best, apparently, because every mammal has 4 limbs. So there's a lot of units in Ukraine have found the right way to do things, and the fact that they are now pouring more resources and support behind these successful units is it's incredibly exciting for us to see, because this is what we've wanted to see from the Ukrainian side for a long time, and it shows that we are not static. Our side is learning and evolving, and I think that I think personally that Ukrainian forces are capable of much more than you see in the common sort of expert and pundit interpretations of things, especially especially on the less reliable allies side, the people that are talking about how we're, yeah, we're going to collapse every. I've been hearing about our imminent collapse for the past 3 years, and it's
Well,
pretty
actually,
interesting because
I'd be interested to get onto that in a second. I've just got a few questions, mainly, I say mainly, entirely from Goose Springsteen, who is a staunch supporter of the channel. Thank you. Often ask some challenging questions. Let's see what he has today. Does Kevin think that there are any areas where we risk learning the wrong lessons from Ukraine? Michael Kaufman has said air power would likely allow Western forces to maintain greater mobility, assuming US help. Of course, they don't have the close air support they'd like. But are there any wrong lessons that we can take from Ukraine? I interpret that as
yeah, I've seen, yes, okay, I've seen some people take really dumb conclusions. Tanks are obsolete. We're never going to use tanks
right.
again. I know a Canadian woman who she switched to working with drones, but it's just because locally in her area tanks have been used less lately. But she joined she was an officer here, and she worked with us for a little while, and then she joined the Ukrainian army as a tanker. And there's absolutely still a role for tanks, even in supporting infantry assaults. The people will take a new vulnerability and then go, okay, that's it. Some entire genre of military equipment is totally cooked forever. Helicopters, another example. Helicopters are at much greater risk in an environment that has really strongly propagated anti-air defenses, especially things like manpads. Um, but nonetheless, Ukrainian, especially special operators, are still using helicopter insertions to this day. It's just not talked about very often.
Mm.
And so
And the Russians are using helicopters quite effectively, although there are times of the war where that has dipped, and again, it will depend on the
mhm,
availability of manpads. But
that's it.
you talk about the 2023 counteroffensive. The Russians use helicopters incredibly effectively, particularly to begin with, in hitting the Ukrainian armor that was not
Yes.
advancing.
Yep. There was the 2023 offensive was very frustrating for a lot of us to watch because they tried to do a really complex combined arms operation. First of all, in the completely wrong place,
Yeah,
attacking the Sorokin line.
that was the Robotina was the single most entrenched area. Like, it was literally like the strongest place that you could possibly attack
Yeah,
was there. Never
and
understood.
I mean, the art of war is kind of it's oversimplified because it's Sun Tzu was trying to advise people who had no military background whatsoever. So some of the stuff he's saying seems very obvious, but I mean, really, attack where your enemy is weak. Yeah, no,
Mm.
like, come on, no shit. Like that. Yeah. So the
Yeah.
2023 was frustrating, and yeah, that's part of us drawing the wrong conclusions because a lot of people went, the Ukrainians can't do combined arms. It's bullshit. I know that. I've seen deputy battalion commanders pull off really, really slick combined arms operations that were incredibly successful, and saw this single attack collapsing entire sections of Russia's defensive. Um, but yeah, there's tons of danger taking wrong conclusions, and we've got to remember that uh, it the changing capabilities, yeah, that does represent some differences, some new things that we have to react to. So infantry, um, people think they're saying FPV drones that's making infantry obsolete, but well, not really. You now have kind of a new type of capability, right? But you just need to make adjustments to that. So before we had large scale jamming, and that would kind of clear the air for you. With the advent now of fiber optic controlled drones, obviously the only option is hard kill to just destroy them. But that's where you have. I was saying, like, there is a role in an infantry section or squad you must have a drone sentry, and that's somebody like with a shotgun or some other kind of weapon that can fire out a spray of projectiles to hit a drone. So these are just new capabilities. We just have to adjust to them, but it doesn't, like, the new capabilities don't obviate entire swaths of old technology. That's very, very
Because
rare.
at the end of the day, though, the use of that kit is in line with, say, a NATO doctrine of where you're going to be going in and doing suppression of enemy air defenses. You're going to be doing, but like the whole Ukraine war has not worked to how a NATO armed force would do an offensive operation. It was defensive, and then it had to then collect itself, you know, the Ukrainian armed forces, and then you're trying to do offenses in certain areas, but no one's got air superiority, and etc. etc. Like, we know all of this stuff, but it's like you then can't. It's very difficult to insert NATO training and doctrine into the middle of this very complex and messy, although it's quite then static, but that creates its own problems that NATO isn't used to really having to deal with.
Exactly. So I mean, there's NATO. NATO really could and should look back at what they fought a war with like peer contested airspace. It was the Korean War, and you had early early Russian jet fighters against early Western jet fighters, and like that's there's precedent. There's precedent right there for fighting in contested airspace, and it goes to show you that, like, yeah, just because the other guy has a better chance of shooting down your planes, it doesn't mean, oh well, we can't use planes in any way. And I mean, the Ukrainians, they showed that as well. Like the success of like the HARMS anti-radar missiles, those are great, and those are standoff weapons. So it just morphs how you use your capabilities. But it really, very, very few capabilities are removed. Like, we're not seeing anything like the obsolescence of the battleship or something like that, or the advent of the tank. We haven't, in my opinion, we haven't seen a technology appear that has caused a paradigm shift like we did with tanks.
Yeah.
So there's a lot.
It's
like,
funny how it's funny how tanks, though, like the Russian tanks have become, as Andrew Perpetua calls them, track garden sheds, where you see these, like, I mean, there is but this is all part of the evolution of war, which is like, we have a problem. How do we get around this problem? Our problem is drones. And our other problem is we can't fix our tanks, or that means we're losing a tank for 2 months. So we need to get troops from A to B. Let's take a tank that's turret's broken or whatever. This is how I speculate. We put a load of iron sheeting on top. We've got an APC. It can't do anything else but move from A to B. So job done. And it's like, problem, solution.
Some of the, and that's some of the other stuff. That's where we can draw some really wrong conclusions. Like, you have to look at the way Ukraine is fighting and the way Russia's fighting. So at the end of the Soviet Union and in the 90s, Russia did their best to totally deindustrialize Ukraine. They dismantled and shipped entire factories out of the country, because they began planning for what they're doing now back in 91. And so you're seeing adaptations in a very resource constrained environment. Ukraine has really taken a beating economically, but that what that has just led to is innovation on the Ukrainian side, where they're figuring out how to build capabilities with the fewest resources possible. And so there's all kinds of stuff where you can get these wrong conclusions, because Western militaries in a conventional war scenario are probably not going to be as resource constrained as we are in Ukraine. There's time, and we're seeing this in Germany. There's time to retool factories and build the manufacturing and repair capacity that is needed for sustained sustained conventional warfare. Like Volkswagen's they've been getting absolute kicking from all these shitty Chinese brands coming into the EU. So what they're saying is they're going, hey, look, we can retool our factories and we'll start making tanks instead of Jettas. And that's
you've
good.
had Rheinmetall as well saying that. And if you can't build it, we'll take over your factories and we'll build it. So
we've had Rheinmetall with a stock trajectory that looks more like frankly, it looks more like a meme coin. To the moon. 1500% increase. Yeah, and good for them. Good for them.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be complained about. Certainly in the American context, about regulatory capture, industry capture, political capture by the military-industrial complex. But sometimes, quite frankly, you do need your military-industrial complex, like
I've
in a
had these
war.
conversations. Yeah, I've had these conversations myself on this channel. I've said like 10 years
Yeah,
ago, I would have been anti-military industrial complex and blah, 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 blah. But once you get an understanding of, well, if you're at war, you kind of bloody need them. And
yeah,
actually, yeah, they're entitled to make a profit as long as they're not commanding crazy profits.
exactly.
And with government strategic input, then the public and private sectors can work really well. And as long as there's a good strategic input from a government, so where you need to actually drive on and say we are going to put these orders in, and actually we do need to start thinking in a 5-10 year kind of state of affairs here with regard to the war in Ukraine. Like there were
Hmm.
decisions that weren't made maybe 3 years ago, but you need both a public and private to work together. Absolutely. I've
Yeah,
got loads more questions for you.
let's
um
do it.
so Goose Springsteen says Franz Stefan Gardi said that the North Koreans' contribution to Kursk, and I think I completely agree with Goose here, has actually been more effective than first anticipated. My own thought is that I think the mockers do a disservice to the valor of Ukrainians by downplaying what they face. My thoughts have been that I got really annoyed with, and there were some people I know quite well and other YouTubers who said, who kind of mocked the North Koreans and said they're just going to be cannon fodder. But even if they are
Hmm.
cannon fodder, they are going to be attritional to Ukrainian lives, right? To Ukrainian materiel. So that allowed the Russians a load more elbow room, and I think the North Koreans have been very useful for the Russians. What are your thoughts?
You can have a complete idiot, a total moron. If he's got a gun, he's still got a gun.
Yeah.
And the thing is that the North Koreans are not total morons. I correspond to someone who was fighting them, and he it was very interesting. He's fairly prominent on Twitter, and he addressed this concern. He said, "Look, like don't act like don't talk as if they're just a harmless bunch of idiots walking into our bullets." He says for example, they have very good marksmanship training. They can engage from quite a long distance because of that, and they do things in a coordinated fashion, and they like people were saying like, oh yeah, they attack in a meat wave. Like the modern, like, look, there are absolutely, we'll say, uh, human sacrifice tactics that the Russians and the North Koreans use. They use
But they
them because
still
they work.
work. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
and
exactly.
and it isn't just some guy in a draped in the North Korean flag marching in closed formation at our guys. So no, it definitely, people who discount that, and it is a problem with the online commentary section, is they discount these threats. And yeah, it definitely, I would, I mean, I think it's I don't think it harms the valor of our guys, but it is definitely a downplaying of the threat, and it's making light. And it absolutely does a disservice, though, because then you have, for example, they'll pull off something, and then you have people, even policymakers, going, "Oh, well, but I have it on very good authority, this anonymous Twitter account, that the North Koreans are absolutely nothing but tissue paper, and so how come the Ukrainians are losing?" And a lot of the online conversation ends up with this kind of Marvel movie cheerleading that it's incredibly frustrating for those of us that are in Ukraine all the time. And now, it's a bit of a tough one. We have to. I think we got to kind of police more, and be a little more strict with our online communities, and say, like, guys, like, don't be this way, because
Yeah, like Finnish. I
sorry.
was going to say, like Finnish guy says here, the meat wave is a tactic that's completely valid when there's governments that are not interested in losses. Like if you don't value human lives and you've got endless supplies of them,
Hmm.
then yeah, it's just like firing bullets. If we've got endless supplies of bullets, let's just fire as many bullets as we can. There you go. It's not really.
Let's look at the philosophical tradition of Russia and North Korea. It's Marxism. And in Marxism, people are no different from machine parts. They're a different way, or manufactured in a different way. And yeah, absolutely. When you have that view of human beings, that, I have a standardized piece that I'm going to replace with another standardized piece when it wears out. Yeah, it's just a different way of thinking, and it's one that many of our people, I mean, they deny that that's part of the Marxist philosophy, or that Marxism still influences Russia. and obviously obviously North Korea, or they say like, no, that's not the way that they think, and it it is it it's weird. It's just hard. I think it's hard. I think it's hard for decent, nice, moral Western people to get their head around, put themselves in the headspace of somebody like Stalin or Lavrenti Beria or Kim Il Sung. Um, and I it's a good thing, because I think these people are psychopaths, and
Yeah,
I think that
yeah.
they're like wild dogs. They ought to have been shot, but they weren't, and so historical suffering resulted in them not being from them not being shot. Um, yeah, so it's definitely, we can't downplay this stuff. It's
Yeah. Has the
yeah
war in Ukraine changed your mind about the necessity of cluster weapons and landmines? I mean, that might be aimed at me as a question, rather than
yeah
you, because you probably have a very different opinion of landmines and cluster weapons for serious peer warfare. Likewise, for the morality of banks and pension funds investing in the arms industry. Again, that's probably a question for me. It's
yeah
interesting that a number of nations, and I didn't report this today, but a number of nations are pulling out. Baltic nations are pulling out the Ottawa Convention on
yeah Ottawa Convention.
yeah, on landmines and anti-personnel mines and things like
Hmm.
that, because this war has shown us that, as horrible as these things are, you want to use the most effective weapons to bring about the end of the conflict as quickly as possible. You want to win as quickly as possible. So
Yeah,
you use weapons that may down the road be problematic, and you're going to have to spend a lot of time clearing up, and they may harm some civilians, but using them now is like a greater good. You're thinking in terms of a greater
yeah.
good, which is
It's a
bring
it's a
about the end.
necessity.
Yeah.
Look, there's a moral gradient on tactics and tools.
Mm,
So we have, let's say, on the lighter end of where it becomes immoral would be things like, anti-material rifles, used as sniper rifles, which you're technically not supposed to do. Use of
but I
cluster
don't see why
munitions and
not. Sorry, I don't see why not. Like, so
it's
because
um,
I've got a view of chemical weapons that
yeah.
I mean, this is where I get a bit philosophical. So my background is philosophy, right? So
Mhm.
like, I think it's a false distinction, which is like it, to use a gas that burns someone's body, and you're like, okay, I've got 70% burns and I find it very difficult to breathe, and I've got a pretty horrible existence from the rest of my life. But is that better or worse than getting a bullet through my skull, like, and dying? Like, so if I could get my head blown off by an artillery shell, but the artillery shell's not illegal, and yet this chemical weapon is illegal, but actually I survive with it. Do you know what I mean? And like, I think we make
Yeah.
false distinctions, because all weapons are designed to freaking kill or harm you. And we
Yep.
go, oh, that one's bad, but this one's fine. Hey, it's great to be shot in the face with a with a sniper rifle.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Shoot me in the face. Just don't make me breathe chlorine. No, I mean, there's a lot to talk about on that, on like the target discrimination. So obviously, it's a lot like, what you're doing. You know what you're shooting when you're shooting a 50 cal rifle at a human being, and you know what you're trying to hit.
Mm,
Whereas that gas could spread and get someone that is maybe a non-combatant.
mm,
But I mean, there's lots of stuff that goes into it. But to come back to the original question, I look, as an idealistic and completely naive university student. I'm reading about. I was a history student, and I did a lot of poli sci classes as electives. So I find out about the Ottawa Treaty, and I think what a well-intentioned and
mm,
wonderful, wonderful, treaty. And then I also think about, I know there's workarounds. So you can't have a victim-operated mine in the Canadian Armed Forces, but you can have a victim-operated flare. You can have your mine situated that someone who trips the flare is in the blast radius of the claymore, and you just go, "Oh, the flare's tripped, boom." What's the fucking difference? Pardon
yeah,
me for swearing, but
yeah, that's a great. Yeah, it's a really interesting analogy there.
and
Yeah.
and then now we look at it, and it's like, no, like they're really the utility of of cluster munitions, the utility of mines is such that, in a conventional war scenario, you need area denial. You absolutely need
Mm,
area denial. So mines are a necessity now. But the thing is, right, and you need to hit. So there are certain target types that the best thing to hit them with is a cluster munition.
mm,
And the look at it this way: we're already, like, our enemies already, they have no such, they hold themselves to no such limitations. So we already have a UXO unexploded ordnance for people that don't know, saturated environment. So, hey, like that cat's already out of the bag. Now, at least there's a lower failure percentage for like failure to detonate percentage for our Western-made cluster munitions, and you have newer ones that have a timer. So like I have a rocket that spreads a bunch of mines in an area, but I know that I only have 24 hours where those mines are active, where they'll start either self-destructing or disabling by whatever means after those 24 hours. So I mean, there's I mean that's a weird little ethical workaround, but at least it's there. But this a lot of the I'll put it this way, a lot of the things that I found it easy to believe when I was in my early 20s, safe behind the wall, are shown to be quite false and needlessly limiting when I'm actually standing on the wall and looking what's on the other
Mm.
side. Um,
Yeah, I mean, the moral philosophy is just full of greys. There's no black and white, and it's very difficult. I mean, Vigo here says, look, both chemical weapons, mines, and cluster munitions are banned not because of their effects on enemy soldiers, but the extraneous potential effects
mhm.
on non-combatants. But then you can make exactly the same argument with an artillery shell, which is if I fire an artillery shell into a village full of civilians, then there's going to kill non-combatants. So the idea is I don't fire it near civilians, I fire it on soldiers, and the same with chemical weapons, which is, and I'm not advocating using chemical weapons. What I'm saying is that these distinctions, because it sounds weird what I'm saying, but all I'm saying is that the distinctions in war are odd, which is like war is just industrial scale murder. And you're like, well, you
Yeah,
can murder in this way, but not in that way. And it's just, for me, it's like, well, yeah, okay, fair enough.
but we have the, as I said, it's on a gradient because we have stuff that's more clearly wrong.
Mm,
The outrages that Russians commit against civilian populations in the areas that they occupy.
mm,
Um,
absolutely.
we've discussed this isn't the first theater where rape has been used as a weapon. That's just never,
No,
ever, ever acceptable, and people
yeah.
people guilty of that deserve to be executed. But the but that on the lighter end of the gradient where things are a lot more gray. Um, because like some things are black and white, some things are gray, and there's I do see, like, for me, I do see the why it makes sense to ban more chemical weapons, because it's like your your effect should always be what. So this is like we're taught in the Canadian Armed Forces. We're taught when you're engaging someone with your rifle, you are aiming to kill that person. You're not aiming to wound them, because actually, in fact, wounding them is seen as a not necessarily a war crime, but like needlessly cruel and also ineffective. And so like chemical weapons are often like that, where they severely wound somebody, but they don't a lot of times don't kill them, at least not right away. So you're having someone that potentially for hours after they've been wounded by this chemical weapon is still an operational threat, or against your forces. And and so there's I mean and shit too. I mean, sometimes there are agreements and treaties that are made not for any moral reason, but for cynical political reasons. Like, I don't want my, I don't want, I know my enemy is rather naive and likes to follow rules, so I'm going to make this rule that I'm going to break, but I'm going to count on them
Yeah.
following. And we know the
That's
Russians are
Russia
masters
to
of
a
that.
T. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely to a T. And interesting that there's a lot of negotiations going on at the moment, but that plays a part in negotiations in general, which is Russia saying, yeah, we want a maximal, we want the
Hmm.
US to put as many concessions, make sure that Ukraine has all these concessions, and then we might end up signing a thing knowing full well we're just going to break it anyway. They get to control. Russia has much more scope to do, because they can do kind of anything.
They
They
don't they
they
don't
have
care.
there's an asymmetry there, and so there's
Yeah.
a military advantage, that, or tactical, operational, strategic advantage that they get from being able to break the law.
It's Adam Curtis in hyper normalization looks at this, and he a part of this is, I'll explain why
I
it's
love a
germane
bit
in
of
a
Alan
second.
Curtis.
He's phenomenal. But in hypernormalization, he explains how, like, the Russian attitude is not it's not ideological in the way that we have come to understand it with things like Nazism or fascism or communism. But it's almost the absence of ideology. It's just like distilled nihilism, and so nothing matters, everything's permitted, just do whatever, and push every angle, tell everyone every lie, so that we, reel people in who are useful to us. And the cynical approach to, let's look at the Minsk agreements. They had limitations on the distance from the contact line that certain weapons could be brought, and so the Russians went into that agreement knowing that they were going to bring tanks up to the contact line and shoot into Ukrainian lines, but also knowing that because Ukraine was trying to prove itself to the international community, it was going to have a much more permissible environment for inspectors, and therefore would not be able to bring those analogous weapons to the contact line. Now that all changed with the advent of the Javelin, because suddenly it's like, oh yeah, please do bring your tank up to the line, and I'm going to nuke it with a Javelin from 3 kilometers away. I should say not the advent, but the entry of the Javelin into the Ukrainian theater. But definitely, when we were when I was with the OSCE, overseeing the Minsk agreements and the ceasefires that were made underneath them, we're watching violations of this stuff. The Ukrainians would let our inspectors pretty much anywhere. They let us put up cameras all along the contact line. That's what I dealt with in the technical monitoring center. But the Russian side, the non-government side, as we had to say to be neutral and impartial, they're like, no, you're not allowed to have cameras. No, your inspectors aren't allowed to go here. And they in fact, because we had our ground patrols that would go in and look at, for example, they would do crater analysis, and they'd find what type of weapon caused this, which direction was it fired from, and that kind of crater analysis is showing like, oh wow, the Russian side's firing a lot of stuff over in violation of the ceasefire. And then one day, one of our patrols, it's an anti-tank mine on one of the tracks that they use quite often. And then as a result, our mission said, look, you're not leaving the hard asphalt roads. We're no longer doing crater analysis because you can't enter a field that could potentially have UXO. And it's like, okay, so they hamstrung the ability for the OSCE to really monitor the situation. But it partially hamstrung it. And then later on, when the Technical Monitoring Center was created in early 2018, it was a new little wrinkle for them, because we had these cameras and we're looking, and it's like, okay, we can see where this heavy round is coming in from. We can estimate, because it's visible to us, that it's something not small arms. It's firing on a ballistic trajectory. And that was that level of monitoring made it hard for them to keep up the charade that they were. But they entered into it with this, oh, we just want. They tell every lie to everyone. We're here to defend Russian-speaking minorities.
That's what's
the Ukraine doesn't exist. It's
so frustrating that Trump then says, "Oh, I trust him. I trust Putin." Like, does he actually really believe that, or is he just saying? Because that man is the most untrustworthy. It just blows my mind. I don't want to sidetrack to
no, it is.
But,
that's another one worth its own episode. I don't know. I don't. It's bizarre. I think maybe Trump's going to have to go through his own learning journey. The way that, because look at Macron. Macron was still willing to talk to Putin in the early days, and he said, "Look, I'm going to try."
But the rumor is that was so. Everyone's blaming Macron at the beginning, but from what I heard, it came out later that it was Zelensky that had actually asked Macron to speak to Putin. So it wasn't Macron going off and trying to be the kingmaker, and it was actually Zelensky that said, "Can you be the guy that speaks to Putin for me?" But that would need confirming.
No, and look, I'm gonna go from what I've seen, and I'm gonna assume the best good faith position on Macron's part, that he really felt that there was something to be gained and some way to help reestablish or not reestablish, but establish peace. But we look at how the way that he's spoken publicly has changed over the years, where he's now very bellicose isn't the word, but yeah, it's very strong in how and taking a good moral line. And it's one that I don't even know. It's going to be interesting watching the next presidential elections in France, because I don't know how popular that is for the electorate there. But the point is maybe, who knows? Maybe Trump wakes up in the morning, rolls a set of dice, and that decides his mood for the day. Or maybe he's not even that sophisticated. I don't believe any of this, the fucking 4D chess. He's just 8,000 steps ahead, and you can't discern it because you're a little dumb peasant. Like, no, that's
Absolutely not. Absolutely
bullshit.
not. It's more that he's being manipulated, I think, by people around him who do have ideologies. So Project 2025 people, and I
Oh,
think there are a set of really quite worrisome people there, worrying people who are, I
yes,
think, aligned to. So you've got Tulsi Gabbard, who was
yeah,
yesterday like so DNI, so in charge of 18 intelligence agencies. She's retweeting Ian Mars Chong giving
yeah.
anti-Americans rubbish, and then goes to visit Jackson Hinkle in London. Sorry, no,
It,
goes to visit Jackson Hinkle, who's like saying that Russia should bomb London, and like so there are
it's
people that I think are compromised in the American administration.
and that leads to an interesting, I don't want to talk about, again, I really, like, I despise partisan politics. I think that, um, I think that, I forget who wrote about political parties. He wrote an essay called Political Parties, and I think that he really nailed the nature of them, that they serve their own ends, not the ends of the nation that they operate in. But in any case, I where was I going with this one? The I look at the cultural tint, okay, of somebody like an Ian Miles Chong, somebody like Jackson Hinkle, and this is an Assadist like Tulsi Gabbard. There is something that's very popular in the West, this third worldism. Dugan is a good example of that, where um, it's interesting because they take a lot of narratives that have grown up out of different ideological traditions, and they meld them together. You get a lot of the historical guilt narrative of oh, Western nations, you've just been such terrible colonizers, and it's hilarious because for some reason that's extended to Ukraine, who's colonized exactly no one. No, let me modify that. Uh, 800 years ago, well, maybe actually a little bit. I don't know exactly when, I forget, but whatever. At some point centuries ago, they made the mistake of colonizing the swamp that became Muscovy. Bad move. But no, you get the European settler colonial thing. You get the adulation and celebration of people like Assad and other such. Not that Syria is a third world country, but it is the third world style of governance of warlords and brutality. And you get a celebration of this thing because oh, that sort of primitive thing is it's almost like Rousseau's Noble Savage. Like, they're living a more true life, and you get the traditionalist dupes into like, yeah, it's a more traditional society, and it's like, no, like third world desperation does not lead to Christian morality. It doesn't. Anyone who's spent time in very underdeveloped countries, like, people are clawing to get their way out of there, not because it's a wholesome family environment. Okay. And Russia's a great example of that when you look at
I
the
was just going to
certain
say, yeah.
cultural practices. Um, but there is this third worldism, and yeah, that Ian Miles Chong, which is very hilarious. He's an American cultural pundit that lives in bloody Malaysia and isn't American. Uh, and Hinkle, I think Hinkle's just some kind of get screws loose. The mega communist. Um, it's just people. What I think it is, I mean, first of all, there's a lot of grift because you're someone's getting a lot of engagement on Twitter. He's making money that way. He's getting engagement on social media.
But for the DNI to be like, I mean, it's just rank
Yeah.
ineptitude. It's so beneath
So
what that person should be doing.
this is someone who, I mean, there's a certain amount of parallels between prostitutes and politicians in every case. But here's someone who's just changed her colors like a chameleon as necessary to get into a position of power. And
Yeah.
and she Gabbard, I mean, is just obviously a fucking idiot. But she is selected because she will work relatively loyally at the price Trump is willing to pay.
And that's, I
And
think, the same that can be said for so many of those selections.
except
Loyalty
the
to a
the
person.
a mediocre junior officer as oh my God, Secretary of Defense, like that. What a bizarre choice. And now, I mean, but that feeds into the kind of countercultural narrative of, well, that's he's just outside of the system. There's
Yeah.
lots of people that are outside of the system, and there. But the thing is like you can argue that like long-term interests. Of course, people now have. I encountered the term deep state a lot earlier, years ago, even before I was in university, just sort of in academic papers, discussions of like the permanent government, right? So long-term bureaucrats on multi-decade careers that are kind of making decisions along the same line, in how they interpret what is laid down by the members of the elected members of the government. Okay, like these are things that can be discussed. Unfortunately, they've now turned into really loaded, frankly, propaganda terms that people sling at one another. Um, but there is like, look, there's no way to argue. So Maidan was a replacement of a deep state, of a permanent government, and a certain ideological bent within the Ukrainian government, with a new, more democratic, more innovative, I don't know what you would call it, but a new version, not version, which is not the same thing, but you know what I mean. Like, it was replaced.
Mm.
And so there are discussions, intelligent discussions to be had, probably offline, about these topics. But when you have someone who's okay, yeah, they're Tulsi Gabbard's an outsider for a reason, clearly, because she's either malicious or incompetent. If she went to, I have a friend who spent a lot of time in Syria as a journalist, including being a guest of regime figures, and he insanely brave guy, because he would tell them to their face, like, what you're doing is evil, wrong.
Yeah.
And they'd say, well, listen, you just don't understand the situation. This is blah blah blah. Anyway, but she went like a modern day Walter Duranty, just going in and, like, Walter Duranty, for those people that don't know, he went to the Soviet Union as a personal guest of Joseph Stalin. This is during Holodomor. He said, "There's no starvation here. I ate real great." And he had hot and cold running prostitutes. He was living in the finest hotel that was, pre-Soviet, and was personally catered to, by Stalin. And he gets his fucking Pulitzer Prize out of that. But then, you know he's just lying. He's just being led, and being, it's like people that go on the propaganda tour in North Korea, and they're like, wow, I saw a really well stocked shop, and I wasn't allowed to go in, but everyone was so happy, and I talked to everyone, and they said they're so grateful to the great leader, and like, someone like Gabbard is going in there, and again, either incredibly malicious or incredibly stupid, because she's just buying the propaganda wholesale. And like, that's, what do you say? What do you say about a government, composed of people like that? There's the it affects our negotiations, where we have morons advising the American negotiation team, and the latest thing is the imaginary encirclement of Ukrainian troops in Kursk, where you're talking to people that are there, and they're like, no, we're not encircled. There are small elements that got cut off here and there, and they're having to make their own way back, but there's no large scale encirclement. But then you have the president of the United States constantly talking about it, or the 350 billion, in aid. Um, it's a mixture of, they always say, don't attribute to malice what's better explained by stupidity, but sometimes there are just stupid, malicious people. and,
Yeah, and
and you
it's funny that I think there are the parallels to, the say, Putinism, or actually
Mhm.
no, probably to dictatorship. And this is a worrying thing about the U.S. administration, is that there it seems to be the preference for loyalty over competence, and that's what you need in order to stay in power. You look at
Yep.
Putin. He does the more competent people there are, the more they become a threat. So you look at
Yeah.
Prigozhin. Prigozhin ended up dying because actually he was fairly, I mean, in horrible ways, fairly competent at what he was doing, and then got so frustrated with what an incompetent regime was doing in order to try. They
Hmm.
both had the same goals, but he was like, well, they're doing this crap. It's a bit like Evil Gherkin, who's ended
Hmm.
up being in prison because these people. Yeah, so dictators don't like competent people around them. They like loyal
No.
people around them.
And may they always shoot themselves in the foot, because there's it we're a little free with the term dictatorship these days. Like it's always kind of funny when I see people um, uh, equate feudalism with dictatorship, like modern dictatorship, and it's like no, like this is feudalism existed in a time when your control measures were, you know, can I make this baron do what I want because he's got 5,000 men at arms and I only have two. You know, maybe I can't just take his land. Um, and I mean there are parallels, but you know, in the modern era, you have such control measures. Like you have modern propaganda. You have like monitoring and it happens in our nations as well. Is just like the way that the state is able to watch everything that its citizens say and do. Um, Modern dictatorship is something very very different from what we've got on the historical record. I mean, there's obviously a trail that has led to today modern dictatorship, but it's now empowered in many scary ways. But the in terms of but so that's why I say, you know, may they always get paranoid and shoot themselves in the foot. May they always
Yeah.
take down people that are close to them. I
There's
saw
an
someone
exception.
commenting about
Yeah, exception here.
yeah.
Lavrov is still there and he's quite competent. I think, yeah, that's a really good point, and that is an exception. But I don't think he's a threat.
Mhm.
So he's
No,
actually done that job for so long that he
yeah.
is just really good at that, and he's too old to be. He would never
and,
be. He would never take Putin's place. So that's an exception.
and there's and look, like I mean, the worst people in the world still have they are still people. They are still human. That you know, Hitler and Stalin both loved their mothers, right?
Mm,
Like they had people that they trusted and were close to them. And I mean, there's every chance that Lavrov is just someone who is actually a loyal friend and actually, you know, wouldn't sell Putin out, and Putin knows and can trust that. Like that's completely possible.
mm,
You know, we do ourselves a disservice when we turn evil people into cartoons.
yeah.
Evil is not a cartoon. Evil is a very dangerous thing. It's a very real thing, and it can be cunning, it can be intelligent, and it can be competent. And so
I
we must always remember that.
I've often said that, Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot, they didn't wake up and go, "Do you know what? Today I'm going to do the most evil thing I can possibly
Yeah.
think of." They wake up and say, "I'm going to do what I think is right for my country and for my ideology." Now,
Hmm.
it just turns out that garbage in, garbage out. So if you are plugging in lots of, fairly dubious inputs into your function machine, you are going to come out with some fairly dubious conclusions. But
Propaganda, ideology.
yeah, dehumanizing. Like if you
Yeah,
genuinely believe that these people are less than, then you are going to have some pretty terrible conclusions. But you are not waking up and saying, I am going to be evil today. You're literally
exactly.
actually the
Well,
opposite. You're waking up and saying, I'm going to do the best I possibly can for
yes,
my ideal of what the country should be.
for my in group. There's a
Yeah.
very long and for people who care to study it, it always bothers me when people say like, no, you shouldn't because you're, you know, oh, if you study a thing too closely, it's because you're that thing.
Yeah,
Like,
Nietzsche. Like you stare into the eyes of the abyss and yeah.
wait, he warns you against that. He says it's possible to do that, but guard yourself against it, and it won't
Mm,
happen.
mm.
And I mean, people mistreat Nietzsche so bad for, especially when they say like oh yeah, he was, you know, he was such a Nazi. It's like that's anyway. But no, but I mean, there is you can track the ideological and sort of intellectual steps that brought. We'll use Hitler as an example that brought him from Hitler of the 19 teens and the 1920s to Hitler of 1933 to Hitler of the, you know, the days of the Wannsee Conference.
Mm.
And we, you know, when I studied history in university, we looked at the Holocaust in detail. And what I liked is that there was a lot of there was nuance to look at as it didn't it was step by deadly step. And you
Mm.
read the book Ordinary People and the early days of the Holocaust of bullets, and the, you know, there were people, psychopathic people, I think probably, looking at the effect on German police when they're told to personally execute a mass number of people, and then there's people noting that and going, well, we need to avoid that, you know, again, psychopaths noting that this psychological effect is reducing reducing the efficiency of our mass murder, our genocide. So we need to adjust for that, like step by evil step.
Yeah, so
You know,
this is explanation, not justification. Which is, you know, when you
yeah,
watch documentary series on mass murderers or whatever, you're like, was this person born to do it, or was it nature nurture? Well, it's
yeah,
both, and we can actually map out how this person became the person they became.
exactly.
One of my favorite books I've ever read is by Adrian Raine, called the Anatomy of Violence, talking about the biosocial jigsaw, what makes people act in antisocial, behaviorally problematic ways. And it's just, you know, my first book I wrote was about whether or not we have free will, and the idea that I believe we live in a kind of deterministic world, and we have the illusion of free will, but actually we don't. And so, you know, once you start understanding human behavior and environments, then like people act in a way that they act because of, and you just map it back, and there you go. So, but anyway, that's a whole philosophical
Yeah,
storm.
one that you and I sharply disagree on, because I'm a completely anti-deterministic Catholic, and I think that there's, anyway, that's a discussion for in person.
Kevin, there's so much we disagree on in that case, because I've written about 12 books on the notion that, well, not the notion, the idea that God doesn't exist. So I'm an atheistic
Oh God.
philosopher, and you believe in libertarian free will as a Catholic, I assume, and I'm universe is broadly deterministic, at least at the macro level. Yeah, there you go. But
No,
let's,
you're far out ahead of me on the book writing, though.
yeah,
I've written
yeah.
zero.
Yeah. So just a few more. Oh no, got the wrong one there. A few more questions from Goose. He says,
Mhm.
"What does Kevin think of the decision of Ukraine to divert new recruits to experienced brigades? Previously, it was misguided for Ukraine to form green brigades."
I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled. So,
Yeah.
Rubige Brigade is one of the ones that's now going to be seeing a boost, and I've wanted this for a long time. There's the sunk cost fallacy. Like we just need to keep trying the same thing that isn't working. No, and we've avoided that. And put pressure on the commanders that are incompetent, and say, look, we're just not giving you resources anymore because you've replaced your brigade 6 times, and we have no faith in you. But then you find the people that are doing things right, and you pour more resources their way. So I'm very, very happy with this decision, and I think it's the right move. And I think that I've long said publicly as well that we will get nowhere continuing to fight like a Soviet army, because a large Soviet army will defeat a small Soviet army. So we need to be investing in individuals. We need to be using mission command. We need to be using maneuver, and all of those things require well trained troops, and that means you find the brigades that have had these successes and have had Rubish as a terrific internal training system. Each of their battalions has a set of instructors. The instructors fight when the battalion's on combat rotation, and they train when it's not. Um, it's great. There's obviously things to improve, marginal things and larger things, but the you know the point is that by pouring the resources to these more successful formations, we're going to see an improvement on the in battlefield performance. So I'm very, very happy with that decision. Um,
Excellent.
there's a time to generate. Sorry,
No, I was agreeing.
there's a time for like new force generation and new units, and that time is that time frankly is peacetime.
Yeah.
Um, but I have a friend, for example, actually that's he's working with training Hungarian soldiers, and they're building some new capabilities for themselves using some new armored vehicles, and they want to build up their mechanized infantry. That's an interesting thing. I don't want to go on a tangent on this, but it's just a note. Is he's talking a lot with these Hungarian soldiers, and the perspective of the Hungarian soldiers he speaks to is very different from fat old Orban. So I think there's hope
Well,
there.
yeah, and actually, you can see a reflection of that in the polling actually for Peter
Mhm.
Magyar, who's the new upstart leader of the new party. Is it
Mhm.
Tidja or something? But they are polling now, I think 6% above Fidesz, and so I think you know, and the, Hungarians, they know the Soviet Union, right? As
Hmm.
people, I mean, there's a lot of grifting with Viktor Orban. There's an absolute feck ton of corruption. If you look at it, the amount of money his family's got, I mean, there's
His,
like grift
his
central.
palace.
Yeah,
Yeah. The
exactly. And
Oh no,
yeah, so
his dad's palace. Legally, it belongs to his father.
yeah. And it is rather like Putin, which is like, oh look, your daughter happens to be a billionaire. What does she do to earn that money? Oh, no one knows. She just got billion. Yeah, it's like, oh, right, that's
Really
corruption.
successful online gambling career. No,
Yeah.
there's the this kind of thing. It's fun. It's kind of fun now with the again. So I mentioned earlier the large scale monitoring and the data transparency and the data gathering tools that exist now. But it does also work on the side of free people, and you can have someone that flies over Orban's palace, 30 million euro palace, and go, where did he get this? Where did this come from? So there's lots as many tools as our enemies have. When I say enemies, I mean the enemies of free people.
Mm,
Um, those of us who are free have corresponding tools. They use them in different ways, but we can build our own capabilities to work against this corruption. And so it is. There's you know things are very rarely all bad or all good,
mm,
and then that goes for like technology as well, and social movements as well. So I think there's a lot of I'm actually it's very funny. I'm by nature I think an optimistic person. I think to do what I do, running an
mm.
NGO, you have to have a kind of almost irrational optimism because like when I started Sabre, I had no resources, no connections, no money, and I have been able to acquire these things in varying degrees, um, and just because of a belief in what I can do and what my end state is. So it's I said I didn't want to go on a tangent, and I immediately went on a completely uh,
But what's nice as well is you're applying
unguided tangent.
that optimism to an optimistic outlook of life, i.e., the
Yeah.
Ukrainian desire for democracy and freedom. And so there's a very strong moral component to what you're doing. You're not kind of, well, I assume you're not grifting like in a war zone type thing.
Yeah.
You are like, right, I've got skills. I was in Ukraine. I've got this connection to Ukraine. I was doing stuff with the OSCE. And
Mhm.
actually, there's an alignment with having a role, having a career, or whatever you want to call what you do, to it being the right moral thing to do, really helping
Mhm.
Ukraine to be what it can be and it should be. And I think there's a lot to be um, positive about that for in terms of who you are as a person. And who you are as a person is of course Canadian, and we
Yeah.
have a this is that. Do you see that segue into
Yep.
talking about Canada? So we'll sort of finish off today's chat with talking about Canada, and Goose Springsteen will allow us to do that by saying, since Vimy Ridge, Canada, I'm not aware of this. You can
Mhm.
explain. Has had a
I can.
superb infantry tradition. I presume that's like the train that your battle schools or something. From a
Mhm.
geographic point of view, where should Canada focus its budget? They need to exert influence in the Arctic, and that seems to suggest Navy before the Army.
Boy, oh boy, that's a big old policy question for a
Can
simple
you do it in
simple armored
5 sentences?
recce sergeant like me. God in heaven. Uh, yeah, let me answer the question, and then I want to talk a bit about Vimy Ridge because it's cool and it's personal for me. So I think yeah, Arctic sovereignty is super important, and right now we have very little ability to force project into the Arctic, which is pretty stupid. Um, we definitely need to pick up our blue water navy ability or capabilities and our whatever you call the Arctic naval capabilities. Like the fact that we don't have these like nuclear powered icebreakers like Russia does is pretty insane. Because how can we assert ourselves there? I think I think having you know I don't know, frigate or destroyer sized icebreakers that can operate for very long periods of time on their own. So that would imply nuclear powered with lots of food storage
Is
on
that what
board.
you've just agreed to get built with Denmark? Because there's been this
I
shipbuilding agreement with Denmark. I don't know. Maybe you don't know.
don't know. I was
Yeah,
in a mean way very dismissive of the Navy because I've seen too many promotional photos of sailors shooting rifles with no rear sight. Okay, fix yourselves. But anyway, um, no, like the I don't know. I don't know. I haven't followed that actually. I don't take too much time to look at domestic Canadian stuff because I'm really absorbed by work in Ukraine.
yeah,
But we but the point is it's a move in the right direction. Whatever those icebreakers are, however they're powered, is only good for us to have. But we need to be looking at things like long range fires. So having those icebreakers, if they can operate as a missile platform, as a drone platform, then this allows us to address the asymmetry against the Russians because they're always going to have more mass. As for the infantry, what we've got the Canadian Rangers, and they are phenomenal. They're primarily Inuit, at least up in the north, and it's local people. They know the area. They have their traditions of their people and their culture being up there, being nomadic peoples that worked on like they hunted stuff like seals, and they're eating seal and whale blubber, and are perfectly adapted culturally and probably epigenetically, physically to their environment. And they represent this amazing asymmetric force because if we have the Canadian Rangers and they know how to build, they have the resources to build things like IEDs and do some, for example, like crack an ice road, or carry out a simple or even complex or an extended ambush. We ship them a few machine guns and Carl Gustavs and make sure they're trained in how to use them. And then, oh wow, the Russians have the ability they have their Arctic Mobility Brigade and they've got their little paratroopers that can jump into the Arctic. That's great. We just blew up the ice road, or our Canadian Rangers, like they're going over between flows or something in winter, and the ice explodes underneath them, and now they lose an entire company to drowning in their armored vehicles because our Canadian Rangers bored into that ice road and put a bunch of bombs. Like this is we have the ingredients. This is again so frustrating because this is the case in Ukraine. This is the case in Canada. We've got all the ingredients lying around for in this case Arctic defense. It's just, are we using them properly? And this is, I don't expect anyone at D&D to listen to me on that one, but I do have ideas, and I think so. To come back to the initial question, like yeah, like build up our Arctic naval capability, build up our long range fires, build up our ability to fight asymmetrically. So in this case, you would have something like the Rangers note the location of a Russian Arctic command post, say they've invaded our north, or a large Russian ship. They operate in a way that they're unobserved because they're way better at the Arctic environment than our enemy is, because they've just got some guy from Rostov in their Arctic battalion. They, by whatever means, let's say just radio in the location of some Russian ship, and then say we have an icebreaker slash drone carrier that's 200-300 kilometers away, certainly beyond visual. They launched that drone swarm of small propeller powered drones that operate at a low altitude below where the Russians are able to detect them, and then they're putting along with their little ice Moskva, and suddenly 30 drones slam into it and detonate its magazine, and bye bye. It goes like the non-ice Moskva. Um, so definitely, I think Goose. I love Goose Springsteen as an account name, by the way, but I think he's bang on that you do need that more of that naval capability, and leave the hard conventional infantry for other places, because even again to just talk about the fighting asymmetrically with the Rangers without that naval capability in support of them, if they're able to just carry out ambushes and do stuff that trades space for time, a a a well-trained section of troops, who say 8 people, okay, if they have the appropriate resources, sometimes it could even just be the bolt action rifles that are issued to the Rangers. They can hold up an infantry column for a very, very long time, even an armored column if they have the right resources. Because you do something like nail the front vehicle, and you make them come up in their order of battle, and you've got your guys, the guys who fired that say a Carl Gustav round into the that lead vehicle, they've already started pulling out. They're walking away. But then the mortar team that's a kilometer behind them just starts, thank you guys for stopping where we stopped you. And then they just start dumping mortars on top of this column. You can devastate a column that way, or with just the Carl G team, you can hold them up. And no, so we need to start innovating, especially as it comes to Arctic defense, because it's our bloody responsibility. If we're puffing our chest up and saying we're sovereign when the States is talking shit about us, then why don't we need to start walking the talk. So yeah, that phenomenal question. And
yeah. Oh, you back?
Need conventional and asymmetrical approaches. One of the things I want to talk about is just briefly, and maybe I'll make this the last point. You tell me, is the Battle of Vimy Ridge, and I say that it's personal for me because my regiment sent me as the representative for our regiment because one of our progenitor regiments was there at the Battle of Vimy Ridge, and so I was sent for the 100th anniversary. So I got to go and be part of the huge mass formation that was there on the ridge at the memorial. It was the first time that the Canadian Expeditionary Force in World War I was fighting as a large unit, but completely under Canadian command. So it was incredibly, not the entire Canadian Expeditionary Force, but anyway, pivotal for us. And it was it was where we began to really assert ourselves as not just a colony of Britain, but an independent state. And the Canadian infantry in World War I and World War II were savagely effective. Something I don't say this, but I'm not particularly proud of it because I don't think it was necessarily an honorable thing to do. But when there was the Christmas truce between French, British, and German troops, the Canadians, like the Germans, threw some presents over, and the Canadians were, oh, how nice, and they threw presents back, but it was just Mills bombs in the boxes. We were not. We were. It's like it's just kind of gets memed about in like history, social media accounts, but the Canadians were really, really violent because we came from a rugged place.
If you were Australian in that situation, you would use the famous Australian phrase, which is, I don't want to swear here, but the Australians would go, "We're not here to fuck spiders." So like it's this really weird like thing, but we're not here to f around. We're here to
exactly. And it was there's a great book on it's called Vimy. I forget the name of the author, and I read it in lead up to me going on that trip. But it was interesting because we were just so different from the British. Like we drove the British officers nuts because you'd have a bunch of like loggers or guys working in manufacturing, and their foreman would have a university education, so he would be an officer. But he's just Jim to them. They go and they would drink together back home, and so there was a much more casual relationship between enlisted and officers. And I mean, in the best cases of the Canadian Army today, you still see that tradition. I remember best officer I ever worked for was a captain who came from the Vandus to my regiment. Vandu being the 22nd regiment infantry. I think I don't remember the name in English. Anyway, whatever. But or French for that matter. I just remember the Vandus, the nickname. Anyway, whatever. Phenomenal guy. Very, very like. There's no question that he had authority. There's no question that he's in charge. But he would listen to us, and for a lot of us, it was the first time an officer even thought to talk to us like people. So it was incredible. But also, brilliant guy. There was I can say the first time in my military career where I experienced real proper iterative training under his tutelage, and that is our infantry tradition. It's amazing, and it is one that I would like to see revived. But I mean, not revived, but I'd like to see it spread more. You see it still in our it's like our headline infantry unit, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. A lot, actually, I wouldn't say a plurality, but a large number of Sabre's instructors have come from PPCLI, and like every single one of them is phenomenal in the work that they do. So we've got that. I think we're getting the early indications that we need to revive our old military tradition and really bring back our innovation and our um,
Well, talking about your
ferocity.
military, yeah, talking about your military tradition,
Mhm,
and I know we don't agree necessarily politically, sort of talking about like domestic politics and whatnot, but Canada is experiencing something rather bizarre at the moment, in that
mhm,
the US and Donald Trump particularly is threatening you with effectively some kind of either invasion or economic coercion. Either way, e- by the way, I think Donald Trump, I think the USA have failed at NATO Articles 1 and 2. And I
mhm,
think you could invoke NATO against the US, because I think they are using coercive um, activity against Canada and Denmark, arguably, potentially with
mhm.
Greenland. So, anyway, put that aside. And I was listening to Melanie Joly, the foreign minister for Canada, speak so well on this last night at the Charleroi, the kind of G7 foreign ministers meeting in Canada, where she was saying, you know, she was just defending obviously the sovereignty of Canada, while saying, yeah, we are taking this seriously. Some
Mhm,
people come up to me and saying, "Oh, we think this is all jokes." No, like, this is having a tangible effect on the economy. This is affecting people's lives already in terms of
mhm.
losing jobs or losing livelihoods or whatever, as it will in the US. So
Yep.
the feeling I gather from Canadians is that there's kind of white hot anger uh, with the US. People are really peed off and are not stocking shelves with stuff. They're not giving contracts to
Mhm.
Americans. That, there's a
Yep.
rally round a flag effect. And Mark Carney's done a very, I think, clever political thing and gone, I'm not going down to the United States in my first visit. I'm going to go to Europe, go to visit the King of England, which I think, King of Britain, which is King of England, which I think is pertinent. Visit Keir Starmer, visit Emmanuel Macron, because of course the French connection,
Mhm.
and thinking about doing closer trade with Europe, right? And saying we're the
Yep.
most European, non-European country. Uh, so without getting to the politics of it necessarily, I'm interested in what the feeling is on the ground amongst Canadians about how seriously they're taking these threats, and what the sentiments are.
So I'll say this: people that I know, I won't be specific about who, but people that I know very well. One has bought his first gun um, with the, not the expectation, but the belief that he may need to have it, and
Wow.
he's delayed that for years, and then he just said, "Look, I'm just doing it." Um, others, another one, he said on social media, he's like, "We're not becoming a state," and this is someone I know who's in the military. Um, I don't know. I haven't talked to a lot of people about it outside of my family. Um, it's a tough one because I now I know what war is, and I don't want it at both of my homes if I can avoid that.
Mhm.
But here's the thing on the here's the government response. And this is what annoys me, because this is not to be political. So when it comes to politics, there's a book called The Machiavellians. I forget the name of the author. It's a collection of essays and excerpts, and he he advocates for what he calls the Machiavellian political tradition, which is to think about politics. Don't think about oughts. Think about what is. Assess politics in as bloodless way as possible. And I mean, this is what Machiavelli advocated for in The Prince. Is he says, look, like, he says, there's a time to be a fox, a time to be a lion, and yes, you should have your ideals, but you should work towards your ideals with flexibility, um, to a certain degree. And so I don't belong to a political party. People can yell at me. I don't vote. I have not felt democratically represented ever, and so I just don't. And this includes, like, I was engaged. I was in my university's free speech club. I have gone to rallies. I have written politicians. it's you know, it's led to $6,000 of my property being declared illegal. And when I wrote to my local representative, who is ostensibly part of the party that stands against that, he gave me a form letter, and you know, and fuck you very much, basically. So I do not come into this with an ideological or party loyalty, but I question the seriousness. It's good that we're seeing reciprocal tariffs. That's usually coming at the provincial level. It's good that we're seeing like our Western provinces going like, that's fine. We'll stop selling you oil and gas, and you know, we'll sell it elsewhere. But then that's a tough one because we've had pipelines. We haven't been able to build pipelines in a long time. There was a hope to build a pipeline from Alberta to British Columbia so that we could sell oil and gas on the Pacific market, and that was just stopped by, in fact, the government. This is the current. It's the current government. It was Trudeau's government. It was their decision for environmental reasons. And then so there's this rally around the flag, and Carney was talking recently about the, you know, the shamrock rose and this whole entwined, and you know, the fleur de lis and our European historical national symbols. That's okay. That's from someone who's just been part of the government that spent the better part of the past 10 years saying that Canada's a genocide state, and that Canadians need to that there is no mainstream Canadian culture, and that Canadian history is one of is irredeemable and of just of violence and exploitation. That hits me pretty hard because my mother's parents came here in 1948. They were from Slovenia. They had been forced to speak Italian, and their village was Montespina and not its actual name. My grandfather was forcibly conscripted. Him and his guys surrendered to the first British people they found. They came to Canada, and it was for them a refuge. My grandmother particularly, she fled at that time Yugoslavia. She fled because she was agitating in her village for democracy, and so the local brave communist partisans decided that she needed to be killed. They assigned a man to do it, and it's kind of funny because he came to Canada years later, and he told her and he apologized to her. And he said, I just couldn't do it because he was from her village and he knew her. So, and like, people will make all of these, frankly, specious arguments. They weren't exactly welcomed as Slavs speaking a weird foreign language. There was no ESL program. There was no welcome here. My grandmother came here as an indentured worker. She had to spend the first few years with her wages paying off the cost of her transit to Canada. But they instilled in my mother, who instilled in me, a recognition for what Canada is. And I served in a unit that was, at least my squadron in my regiment, is primarily people from we'll say visible minority backgrounds. And something that we all shared was our appreciation for and loyalty to Canada, because there's many people coming from parts of the world that later on ended up in despotism. A lot of my friends are from Hong Kong. How's Hong Kong doing today? And so it really pisses me. My grandmother would get so angry when people said shitty stuff about Canada. And so I question the sincerity of the flag wavers that 8 months ago were talking about the genocidal crimes of Canada and why we don't have a mainstream culture, because it's like, which is it? Do we deserve sovereignty or don't we? I'm happy that they're making the noises they are, but until we see action, they are just noises. And it comes back to something we briefly talked about in the beginning. They want, like, how would were the United States to take it in their minds to invade us, we would be on much worse odds than Ukraine. We have absolutely no strategic depth. Most of our principal cities are within like 200 kilometers of the U.S. border. I'm currently a little bit north of Toronto, and it's faster for me to drive to Buffalo than it is for me to drive to Ottawa. So, like.
But I mean, you're a former soldier and present trainer. So and sorry to interrupt you because you were just going off on one, but would if the Americans were told, and I just don't think this would really actually happen, but if they were told to invade Canada, like surely American soldiers would go, I can't do this. Like I don't know how pliable are soldiers. Like I don't know. You know,
Your
you look at
mileage,
the
your
Second World
mileage may
War.
vary. Your mileage may
Yeah.
vary. I met a lot of order followers when I was in the army, and I met a lot of guys who also could think. Um, I know of a U.S. veteran. He's jokingly, but he said, "I'm also available to train asymmetric forces in Canada." Um, it's tough. It's tough. Some percentage of people will just follow orders. We
Mm,
know this,
mm.
especially if they're walked into it over a period. Like if we get the rest of this Trump presidency, and we get, say, we're very unlucky, and we have 8
Vance
years
president.
advance
Yeah,
in
it's
12
bit by
years.
bit. Yeah, that's
In
interesting.
12 years of we're subsidizing Canada, they're putting fentanyl in here, and the who knows where it could go.
Yeah,
And
that's true. That's a good point.
I don't want to find out. I don't want it to be like that. We would have to fight asymmetrically. And it's funny because I said this once in a room full of other senior NCOs. I said, we really ought to take the time to understand this is during the Afghan era, understand how our enemy fights in Afghanistan, because we are a very large territory with a very small population relative to the territory, and especially a smaller army. So if anyone who had the resources to reach and invade Canada would overwhelm our military conventionally. So we would have to fight
Mm.
asymmetrically. I got laughed at. And so I don't know. I don't know. Maybe people are taking this more seriously now, but so one of the signs which I see is not encouraging is we have people, as I said, these experts calling for civil defense. Okay, what has been the core of civil defense? That was in Ukraine, in Denmark, and when they were briefly able to resist the Germans. In Belgium is another good example of that. Was civilian gun clubs. Usually veterans get together, they get their guns, they can keep them so that they're ready to fight, as basically step out of their door and fight in an asymmetric way. Um, they the basically the day when people or the week that people are talking about civil defense and all these threats coming from the states, our government bans by name a list of 178 or something like that, 179 guns. So there is a 100% an agenda of civilian disarmament, and then people can argue about why that's necessary.
Mm.
I'm just not going to get into that argument because it's fucking wrong. Um, we have so many examples of heavily armed civilian populations that don't sink into crime. The causes of crime are very different from there's a gun available. Like, I've owned guns for years, and somehow I've managed never to rob a bank, even when I've been in frankly desperate financial situations, because I know that it's mustn't do that. Like, it's not my right to aggress against people. And anyway, um, you
This
know,
is a whole other conversation. But yeah,
it is, but
yeah,
also look, as I said, I'm looking at what is, not what should be.
mm,
Who would make up the backbone of civil defense? It is
yeah.
historically precedented. And so, as I say, we are seeing actions going in one direction, words going in another. I'm not shilling for the Conservative Party. I truly do not give a shit about political parties. I'm antagonistic to all of them, because parties serve party interests. In every system you look at, they serve party interests ahead of anyone else. So, it.
Well, I mean, let's hope it doesn't get to that need for asymmetric warfare
Mhm.
and people defending their homes literally with their own firearms. But these are scary times when the rhetoric is so blasé, and it's said in a way that half the people think it's a joke and half the people don't, and that's super
Mhm.
dangerous, because then you can retroactively
It,
apply. Like you said, I'm going to solve the Ukraine war in 24 hours, and then 6 months later he's like, oh yeah, I was being sarcastic. No, you weren't at the
yeah,
time. Literally everyone believed that that's what you were saying, so you can't now just go, oh, I
exactly.
was joking. Like, so
It's
I think that's
polit-
dangerous.
he's pure politician. He's a pure politician. He has never produced anything in his life. He's not a businessman. He has worked in the like, if political meaning. Well, he worked in the political things in New York in order to get the rights to develop things the way that he needed to. But he has never. He's been a rent seeker from the beginning,
Mm.
and he is not a producer. He is not a businessman in the sense that most people think. And so he's a bullshit artist. But the one thing that I wanted to say, there was a comment that came up, and I'm not trying to jump on anybody, and they're saying, as a Canadian, fuck USA. I
Yeah,
just
yeah, I
no,
put that out there.
I want to push back on that, because so Sabre, just by the function that the US has 10 times our population, Sabre has had a large number of American instructors, our largest
Mm,
donors, the organizations that support us the most,
mm,
our fiscal sponsor for facilitating tax refundable donations. Okay, that's all Americans. So no, I'm
yeah.
not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I
I,
know so many
I
Americans that are on our side.
I try and make the distinction as often as possible, but the amount of words I speak is sometimes difficult. But I try and make a qualification that I'm talking about the Trump administration when I'm talking
Yeah.
about America, and that because I know, because so many of my viewers are dyed in the wool supporters of Ukraine and are Americans who disagree with the approach of the present administration vis-a-vis
Yep.
Ukraine. So yeah, absolutely, distinction well made.
It's and there's a lot of cases. Again, this is another political reality. Like, many even elected governments are not very representative of their populations, and so this is a really strong case of that. I don't believe for a second, and this is, I think, reason for hope. I don't believe for a second that the American people would find an invasion of Canada conscionable. And I think, I was a little morose
Agree.
before, but I would say that I think we would see more people diverting and resisting, and not necessarily resisting, but like disrupting the ability of say of any hypothetical American force moving into Canada. I think we'd see a lot of the border Americans fighting against that, or
Yeah.
sabotaging that, because there's so much shared history and
Yeah.
strong ties between us and Americans. So
It
no,
just
I
seems
just
unbelievable. It's a conversation we're even having, eh? And it's not one
eh,
we would have had like 5 years ago or whatever, 10 years, 2 months ago. But there you go.
we are in. Francis Fukuyama was wrong. We are
Yeah.
we are back, and that we're out of the binge of the 90s, and we're now in the
Yeah.
hangover,
Yeah.
and we're the full forces of history are acting upon us. And it's funny because I say this. I read, stuff I read about the 19th century and the early 20th century. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of echoes, in the news I'm reading today.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but overall,
Oh,
I
bring back the
sorry,
90s. I like them. I bring back the 90s. I like them.
bring back the 90s Euro music. That was uh, my for various reasons, that was very popular in the town that I grew up in. So I listened to
Happy
a lot of that
days.
when I was a kid. But I want to be respectful of your time. I think you're coming up on the limit. So
Yeah. Well,
shall
yeah.
we?
Yeah, I was just going to wrap up with a kind of thank you to Johnny. Really appreciate that, matey. Thank you to Kevin Force. Really super kind always. And a few more from Goose, but these are not questions. So in happier times, I'd love to see Kevin make regular appearances on your philosophy channel regarding free will. JP, brilliant guest and conversation. Oh, there's a big discussion to be had there. You can actually, I've done
Yeah,
a couple of massive synopsis videos on free will. If you're interested in that whole subject, I've done a whole presentation on my channel. Most of you probably don't know. My first channel, my proper channel, if you like, on YouTube is called A Tippling Philosopher, which is where ATP comes from. So A Tippling Philosopher, you go and search it out. You can see me bang on about philosophy ad nauseum. But there you go. I can't. Sorry, carry on.
no, one of the things that I wanted to say, because a lot of time I have very strong opinions, and I've seen when I express them, people often think that it means that because I disagree with them, even stridently, that I think badly of them. And I just if anyone, especially mostly the person who was saying, fuck USA, like I don't want you to think that I'm think
Yeah, yeah,
badly of people when I disagree with them. I have to must
Absolutely.
express myself.
Understood. You and me both. In happier times, I'd love to see Kevin make. Oh no, I've just read that.
Yeah.
I can't resist the Canadian stuff. Says Goose Springsteen. The left wing lies about. See, Goose is Goose aligns with you a little bit. Left wing lies about alleged unmarked graveyards at the Indigenous schools and a shocking example of fake news. Although there's a bit of pushback on your claim of the pipeline Liberals bought and are building the pipeline going to the West Coast, not stopped it. So, but don't that's not. I don't know enough about any of that.
I'm behind the times, I guess.
John Hare says, "Got to go. Thanks for the chat. And as a veteran and instructor, I found it very interesting. So good to see you've got some like-minded people. Now, this is something I wanted to mention when we were talking about chemical warfare and etc. and the kind of morality of stuff. And this is something that I've reported on that I'm deeply worried about. That Pete Hegseth has gotten rid of not only the whole top echelon. Well, Trump got rid of the whole top echelon of the your 4-star generals and admirals and whatever from the armed forces of the US, but then just got rid of all the JAGs. And these are the attorney generals. These are the lawyers. And the only reason you do that, really, I can see, is if you want to break the rules. And I just really worry that there's all sorts of paving the way for bad things to happen going forward, both in the domestic kind of political realm, but also the military political realm here. So,
definitely. Anyway. Well, I mean, look at. I mean, sometimes it gets a little tiring doing all the historical parallels between mid and early century Germany, but the tension between the party militias and the German army, because the German army followed the Prussian tradition of loyalty to the state, but the state is separate from the party, whereas the party militias were of and with the party. So yeah, it's they're frightening times, frankly. Not just interesting, but frightening.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan, Kevin. Super interesting stream. As always, everyone, please hit the like button. Absolutely. Thanks, matey. Look, Kevin, I presume the sorts of funding that you require for Sabre is not the sort of crowdfunding that you might see for NAFO trucks, I presume. But how can people, or maybe I'm wrong, so how can people help you and your organization to provide what's needed for Ukraine? Where can they, what would you like to say to appeal to the audience?
So we do a little bit of equipment purchasing for ourselves, and sometimes things like tourniquets for our students. But no, primarily, we are fundraising for operating funds, and so that's to feed and house our instructors, to buy fuel for our vehicles. But people can check out our website there. Yeah, so www.sabretag.org. They can donate to us. Should anyone be interested in making larger donations in the United States, we have the means of working through a fiscal sponsor to get tax-deductible donations for American citizens. So that's an option too. But no, it is, what we have to show off is in the, it's measured in lives saved and efficacy on the battlefield. So we don't have the traditional way of showing a big field of drones or a bunch of trucks like the sniffing brigade. But no, know that the money that comes to us is, everything that we've achieved. It's actually available in our 2024 impact report. Everything we've achieved has been with under $100,000 total donations. So we have no problem operating on a shoestring budget, and that it's not by accident. We do everything efficiently. So, and we really do appreciate all the support.
So indeed, then please do, if you have a spare penny or two, please do help then Sabre on their donate page. I'll add your website to the description because I haven't yet done that. But yeah, no, it's far be it from me to say thank you, like I'm some random Brit, but
No.
Awesome work. I've met you in Ukraine, out there doing your thing, and as your impact report no doubt states that you are making an impact, and that's absolutely awesome. So thank you very much. Any last words, Kevin?
That's it. Thank you very much for having me on. Thank you for sharing your platform, and thank you to everyone who tuned in and everyone who watches, because this is it. This is a front in the war, is the information battle. So we get this out here, and that's it. So thank you. And next time you're in Ukraine, it would be cool. We'll need a little heads up, but it'd be great to get you out on the camp, and you can see the training up close.
That would be amazing, and I do really, and I want to get out there not in winter time. 2 times I've been in Ukraine, it's been like January, February, and freezing my nuts
Yeah,
off. But
come in late spring.
Yeah, that'd be nice. That'd be nice. Look, well, stay on the line. But in the meantime, thank you so much. Thank you very much to the audience. Thank you for your kind support, particularly Goose Springsteen, but all the others as well. You guys are the best. The best community I know on YouTube. So thank you for all your amazingness. And yeah, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.